I heard called the president. Did you tell me that, Sean? That,
The president advised the two people that contacted her. So the questions.
and one said that
One or
she,
two thought they had been excluded somehow from working with them, and I'm sure that's not.
yeah, I have assured everybody that that isn't true. We had people at that very last meeting that were not at any other meetings, and nobody excluded them, and they got every question that they wanted answered. So,
Good.
and this will be a big screen, and if you're looking at it and you look up, all they see is the whites of your eyes. It's kind of a scary screen.
Okay, it is now 3 o'clock. Let's get the Land Use Committee meeting called to order. Let the record reflect that we have Pro Tem Hollins, Councilman Carter, Councilwoman Kilpatrick, Councilman Cartier, Councilwoman George, Councilman Sheldon, Councilman Toole, Councilwoman Durham, Council President Karen Hartley-Nagel. You're with us?
Yes, here.
And my aide, Cable Davis, hopefully, if you have not, you will get the opportunity to meet her soon. We'll be taking the minutes. Can I have a motion on the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
First item on the agenda is resolution to terminate a declaration of restrictions for 713 and 721 Valley Road. That's under the sponsorship of Councilwoman Kilpatrick.
Thank
Councilwoman
you.
Kilpatrick.
Thank you. These are companion resolution and ordinance, and I would like, if we could, to just treat them both at the same time.
We need to,
So it's the ordinance is for the development and the resolution is for the deed restrictions.
and, okay, so the discussion, let's see, we have Leori on. I think we just need to make a motion to hear him at the time. Correct, Mike?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it's fine to do that, yes.
Okay, so Councilwoman, if you want to make a motion?
Okay, I move that we we hear resolution, I don't have a number on this one, for deed restrictions and ordinance 22128 at the same time through the same presentation. So if you don't mind, I have Sean Tucker here. I have
Okay,
8
let's get that
people.
motion, let's get that motion passed.
Oh, sorry.
Cartier just said second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all right, so now we will, all right, hold on one second, Councilwoman. So we are also going to have a review of ordinance 22-128. That's the revised zoning map of Mill Creek 100, east side of Valley Road, 850 feet south of Evanston Road, and to rezone the tax parcels. So you do realize with that, when we get to council, of course, that'll be a roll call vote, so we will not be able to hear them together, but hopefully by then we'll be comfortable with them.
Right.
Councilwoman Kilpatrick.
Thank you. I have 8 people in chamber today. This is probably the most this chamber has seen in months and months. And Sean Tucker is here as a representative for the development, and he is going to give a short presentation. He first told me it would be 30 minutes. I told him he would lose all of us. So we're going to have a short presentation and then take questions and answers after that.
Excellent. Okay. Mr. Tucker, we'll turn to you. Just remember to state your name before making any presentations. And if you refer to anybody that happens to be with you, we need to also make sure we capture their name. Thank you. If you want to get started.
Thank you, Councilman. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. For the record, my name is Sean Tucker, and I am Land Use Counsel to the developer in regard to this application today, VRH2 LLC. Here with me are Jay Sinetcha on behalf of that entity, as well as Shane Minner and Jack Hillman. Our civil engineer is Jennifer Murphy from CDA. We also have Ted Williams here, who is our client's traffic engineer, and Ellen Tracy, who is our landscape architect. And lastly, paralegal I work with in my office here, who's been involved in this project, Tiffany Williams. I will do my best to honor the request, so I will try to squeeze 30 minutes into 15. I will talk quickly, you know, I might have to skip around a little bit, but I will do my very best to shorten the length of the presentation this afternoon. And with the help of, I guess it's Nellie who's running?
It's Tara, I believe.
Tara, okay, thank you, Tara. Tara is kind enough to be running the presentation for us today. So this is a project in Hockessin, in Janet Kilpatrick's district, known as Hockessin Station. Next slide, please. And just to orient everyone, this project is located between Lancaster Pike and Route 7, also known as Limestone Hills, along Valley Road. It is approximately 58 acres in size. It is identified in the large green drawing to the south along Valley Road that you can see on your screen. Next slide, please. As in all projects, we always, and this is not just important to me as a land use attorney, but also to Mr. Sinetcha, we always reach out to the local group or the local civic umbrella group or the immediate neighbors, depending on the circumstances. In this case, GATA certainly has had long-standing in this area and are a very credible organization that we work with when we have projects in Hockessin, have been for many years. We reached out to them, and this dates back to pre-COVID, to form a working group. There had been a group already in place, ironically, talking about the redevelopment of Valley Road, so we were able to work with that group, and I believe there may have been some additions made at that time. And originally, this project was going to be mixed use. COVID changed that for a variety of reasons. Now, today before you, we do a residential plan that was and is supported by the working group that has met, as I indicated, since COVID began. Our latest meetings were on September 15th and October 26th of this year. So we do have their support. I believe Mr. Blake has entered the chambers just a little bit ago and will speak perhaps to that. In addition, there are a couple of emails that were circulated just before the meeting started today. One was actually from a member of the working group. Another came from, and again, this should have been in the email you received from Mr. Smith before we started. A second one came from Pete Seeley, who is the president of the Hockessin Historical Society, who was very thankful to Mr. Sinetcha for his preservation that is included in this plan. Next slide, please. So just to drill down a bit into the parcels and the current uses, today, as you can see, there are approximately 9 parcels, and we have a mix of suburban zoning, commercial neighborhood zoning, and I zoning, quite surprisingly, along Valley Road. Next slide. This is an existing conditions plan. It has been modified somewhat. The former McGrellis Auction House, which appears on the left side of the screen, sort of middle center, that has been demolished by my client to pave the way, so to speak, for this project. But you can see a lot of other structures and buildings that would be cleaned up and redeveloped as part of this project, including a home that will now be zoned historic with council's blessing and as part of this application. Next slide, please. And now to drill down into the site plan or exploratory plan itself. Again, approximately 58 acres. There's the mix of zoning types that I referenced. And we are proposing today to rezone the property from CNI to ST only, ST or suburban transition. I will note that the Planning Board and the Department of Land Use did recommend in favor of this rezoning, as well as the companion deed restriction amendment change, which I'll explain in just a little bit. As you can see on the plan, there are 147 units proposed. There are 15 village units, which are single family, 15 what are called Motok twins, 12 Keaton twins, 42 Aspen two-story townhomes, 64 Cypress townhomes that are 3 stories, for a total of 147 units, which provides a density of about 2.7 units per acre. Next slide, please. Quickly, as you all know, there are standards contained in the UDC for an analysis of any rezoning proposal. As I mentioned, the Planning Board and the Department did recommend and support following these standards, consistency with the comp plan being one of the most important, suitability of the project for the area, and effect on nearby properties. B and C on that list are satisfied when A is satisfied, but I will still touch on those briefly. B and C, of course, being consistency with the character of the neighborhood and consistency with zoning and use of nearby properties. Moving on to the next slide, please. This project is located in a level 2 and level 3 area as designated on the state strategies and investment map that is also adopted as part of the Newcastle County Comp Plan. This project does fall under the 2012 plan because of its date of application under state law, so we will be discussing the standards consistent with the 2012 comp plan and not the more recent 2022 plan. We are proposing low density here. We're under 3 units per acre, and in the comprehensive plan in 2012, low density is considered a project 1 to 3 units per acre. And certainly this is an example of redevelopment and infill given the existing structures that will be demolished and one which has already been demolished, as well as infill. This is one of the few remaining parcels in the area that is earmarked for development but had not been fully developed. Moving on, please. And let's jump, if we can, just keep going to the next slide, please. And one more. This is the actual future land use map from the 2012 comp plan. Let me drill down a little bit further into that with the next slide, please. And on this slide, you can see, if you look closely between Route 7 and 41, an outline of all the parcels. And you see the blue as well within those parcels, or that area that's in blue or royal blue surrounding it. That is the industrial, believe it or not, that exists in Hockessin today. And then the rest is both CN and residential, just to give you an idea of what the current zoning is. Next slide, please. Redevelopment and infill, as I've mentioned, are strongly encouraged in the 2012 comp plan, as well as the current comp plan. And here are just a couple of quotes from the comp plan confirming that growth and infill and redevelopment are key elements. And the comp plan continues to encourage redevelopment and infill projects with a couple of citations for the record. Moving on to the next slide, just to give folks a sense of density and what is immediately around us. As some of you may recall, just across the street, there was a rezoning, I guess just prior to COVID, for Valley Grove. And that is a picture of that project with an artist rendering to the left side of your screen. And you will see that Valley Grove, which was just fairly recently approved, had a density of 2.8 units per unit ST. Proposed Hockessin Station at the bottom of the chart to the right, you can see is actually 2.6. I think I said 2.7 earlier, but it's actually mathematically 2.6, give or take. And you have a sense of other projects in the area that have a mix of housing types. And I may have skipped over this, but we have there's singles, towns, and twins are proposed on our plan. So we looked at other projects that have a mix of unit types or towns, for example, predominantly with some singles like Walker Farm. So as you can see, we're on the low threshold in terms of density, but still below the density in the comp plan that would be considered medium or high with the 2.6 units per acre, which is low density, as defined by the comp plan. Next slide, please. As with any major plan and rezoning, a traffic study was performed for this application. We do meet the Newcastle County UDC requirements for level of service. For this project, I'm happy to report no waiver or variance was required from the county code. And Mr. Williams is here if necessary to answer any questions about that. Again, I mentioned the low density. Let me jump into the buffering next, if I could. Moving ahead to the next slide. Well, actually, we have an impact fee slide. Let me touch on that first. So, like all projects, to address our impact on infrastructure, there's an impact fee requirement in the Unified Development Code. We broke those fees out. This project will be contributing to that. Mr. Snettcher will be contributing to that. In addition, there will be a school impact fee. That form has not been submitted yet. We're going to submit that shortly. We see a range of school impact fees. We've seen them range from $6,000 to $9,000 in some instances, but we will have a better understanding of that fee specific for this project before we get to record plan. Those numbers, of course, vary depending on the needs in any given school district. But in addition to the $155,000 total, there will also be a school impact fee for this project. I also want to mention the fact that this project, because it's a rezoning, is required under the moderately priced housing ordinance to provide moderately priced housing. And that is a very important subject for Mr. Snettcher as a developer in this county for many years. And I know it is near and dear to the hearts of some members of council, if not all of council. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that briefly. Approximately $150,000 is estimated to go into the trust fund under the moderately priced housing ordinance. So what does that mean? What that means is there are a certain number of units required to be moderate income housing under the code as written. And in this case, that will be approximately 15% of the units, or I believe 23 units in total. And those ranges are set by ordinance, that is the pricing for those homes and the maximum mortgage amounts, which provide an affordable option in the moderately priced housing range. And the county does a very good job. In fact, just as recently as January 6, 2023, the numbers for people who qualify for those, and when I say numbers, I mean based on income, based on mortgage amounts, who qualifies and who doesn't qualify is provided in terms of those range of home values and mortgage, or I should say sale values and mortgage amounts, so that it's ensured that those houses are made available only to folks who meet the moderately priced housing ordinance requirements. But in addition, the trust fund is a fund, in this case, we estimate it will produce approximately $150,000, is for people in a more lower income status who cannot qualify for the moderately priced housing dwelling. So the ordinance that we're under is mandatory for anybody seeking a rezoning, which is, I think, the only of its kind that I'm aware of. And it does generate significant revenue for the county to help folks who can't afford housing. And then it also provides mandatory moderately priced housing. I will also note that Mr. Sinetcha, because I believe he deserves a lot of credit for this, he has been really one of the trailblazers with affordable housing. As some of you may know, Bayberry has an affordable housing component. His project around the neighborhood, the area of Summit Bridge, even before the workforce housing ordinance, provided affordable options. And even with the Bayberry Town Center, which is a mixed-use project exempt from the workforce or moderately priced housing ordinance, he voluntarily agreed to engage in some affordable housing scheme with the county. So he really has been somebody committed to that. And I also want to make mention of Councilman Hollins, who has certainly been the trailblazer with workforce housing and now moderately priced housing in Newcastle County, and hopefully other jurisdictions will follow suit. Moving on with the land use buffer, as you can see from this plan on the left side, that large red square, that's the buffering that's being provided by this project, and I believe that is Manly behind that box. And that was something that was very important to some of the neighbors on the working group to make sure there was adequate buffering between this project and Manly. Because of a sewer easement, we actually needed a variance to comply with the technical provision of the UDC, but as a function of that, we ended up putting in more landscaping. So that was a positive to avoid adverse impact on neighboring properties. Next slide, please. And on the other side of the property, heading towards Hack, there is an additional area of buffering with our neighboring properties. And that has a drainage easement that also required a technical variance. And again, we put in significant landscaping, more than otherwise required. As I mentioned, Ellen Tracy is here if there's any questions about the landscaping. But the buffering was something very important to us. It was very important to the working group. And we made sure that we took that seriously and actually beefed that up to some extent to address concerns. Next slide, please. Next slide. One more slide, please. Thank you. The Robinson House is being preserved as part of this project. There was a report prepared by the University of Delaware for our client that provides some history. It was really a fascinating, and is a fascinating report to read. But what we learned from the analysis from the University of Delaware folks who were retained to look into this site is that the Robinson House was actually once owned by Burt Matilda, who was a trustee of the Hockessin Black School, which is how it's described in the report. And children who would walk to that school, sometimes up to 2 miles, according to the report, would often stop at this site and get a drink of water. And actually, the folks from University of Delaware located one of those students who was in her 90s and brought her to the site to see if she recognized it. And she did, which is, I thought, really neat. I've never, 20 years, I've not run into that kind of evidence, if you will. And so that is actually referenced in the report. So we are preserving that house. This project did go to the Historic Review Board for review. And an H overlay is required by code, and that is part of this application as well, H for historic, of course. And that house will be preserved as part of the H overlay. There is a preservation plan that has also been submitted to the county, and there are various requirements that go along with that preservation plan. I think the most important of which is that no modification can happen to that preservation plan, which includes, of course, preservation of the home, without going back to the Historic Review Board and getting a permit. So there are ample tools in the code and the ordinance that ensure that the preservation plan remains intact. Next slide, please. And this is a picture of that house that will be preserved by Mr. Sinatra, which he voluntarily agreed to do so, especially after learning of its unique history. Next slide, please. And this is just a summary, if you will, of the Robinson House preservation requirements in the review. That review and the HRB recommendation was part of the department and planning board's review as well. As I mentioned earlier, they did recommend both in favor of this application. Next slide, please. Real quick, just running through some artist renderings of the housing types. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And one more. Also, the UDC Article 1 standards, they overlap somewhat with the rezoning standards, but they're also in the PowerPoint in case anybody has any questions with those. Those are listed in order. Next slide, please. As Councilwoman Kilpatrick mentioned, this is also a deed restriction application. She's combined them, so let me just briefly talk about that. Also, the Department of Land Use and Planning Board examined those criteria for deed restriction change. They did, of course, recommend in favor, as I previously mentioned. Just to cut to the chase, there was a deed restriction put on the McGrellis auction house, which was rezoned to commercial neighborhood many years ago, and it listed restrictions that were all commercial in nature because, of course, it was zoned CN. The community wanted limitations on all the other CN uses that could have been permitted other than an auction house. Residential was not a permitted use. So it is imperative that we extinguish that deed restriction so that the residential use that we're proposing today, along with the ST rezoning, is legal and sound. So certainly those restrictions are no longer needed because under this plan, nobody can do a commercial CN use any longer if it's approved along with its companion rezoning. Next slide, please. And of course, there are the Appendix 7 requirements, the guiding principles. Many of those overlap with the rezoning standards, but we touch on those as well in the PowerPoint and list those in that one slide before you. Next slide, please. Okay, that's as fast as I could do it, Councilwoman Kilpatrick. I hope that was adequate. I may have run a little bit over.
Perfect.
And this, again, is the picture of the project before you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Turning now to council, do we have any questions for members of council? Councilman Carter.
Yeah, I have a couple of quick questions. Are we using the, first one is, are we using the 2012 comp plan because this was grandfathered in when the exploratory plan came in, or just haven't updated to the new comp plan and future maps yet, was the first question.
Thank you for that question, Councilman. We are relying on the 2012 comp plan because this plan was submitted.
Okay.
Under that comp plan, as you may know, there is a state law that requires all land use applications to be processed under the comp plans that exist at the time of application.
Yeah.
And when you read the department's report and the planning board's report, you'll see they also relied on the 2012 comp plan. Having said that, we of course did study the 22 comp plan, and our project is consistent, in my opinion, with those provisions as well. But for legal reasons, I felt it important to present this under the 2012 comp plan.
Yeah, good. The second question is there a bus stop or anything nearby? I know you talk about some amenities, but I'm just curious, do you have a bus stop within reasonable walking distance for public transit? And are there any other stores fairly close? I just don't know what amenities you have there.
Sure. I'm by this area routinely because I joined the Hack, which I speak highly of. But I do travel this road quite a bit, and There are amenities, of course, along Lancaster Pike that are walkable. The Hockessin Library is nearby. And of course, Lantana is at the other end by Limestone Road. And I would say, just from traveling that road, it's a mile or less in each direction from the site, whether you're heading towards downtown Hockessin or Lantana. We do connect in to the sidewalk system, very intentionally so in our design. And so we do have amenities nearby that are walkable and certainly in the winter months drivable. Regarding transit, there is, I believe, and I'm going to defer to Mr. Williams, Ted Williams. He's signaling at least two in the immediate area.
Good. Okay.
Councilman Carter, you have another one?
I have another question for Sean. Sean, I did notice that a filing for legislative agent from you for this one. I think we've been a little lax on that since COVID, and I didn't know if you were. If you haven't, you probably should file under Chapter 202-300.
I actually have one that has not been filed, and with the new year, we actually have a list of several that we intend to file, Councilman.
Okay.
I will note that attorneys who are practicing law, some take some exception to that as to whether that is applicable to us, but I do file those, and I do plan on filing actually a list now that we've entered 2023.
Thank you. I was surprised you're one of the ones who does file them.
I know, many don't.
I'm a little shocked, but I'm going to start tracking that down a little bit and get that cleaned up. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Durham?
Thank you. One follow-up to one of the questions just asked. I didn't, and maybe it's just being on screen, I couldn't quite see. Do you have a slide that shows the sidewalk connections? I don't know if you can show it now or send me later. I'm sure if I could hone in a little bit, zoom in a little closer on some of them.
I'm just checking, Councilwoman. I think slide.
Do the sidewalks go along that Valley Road?
They do. It's slide 6. And we do connect into that system. There is an extensive sidewalk system. Some of it actually goes behind the ball fields when you walk along Valley Road, but it does span from Lancaster Pike. I'm sorry, Councilwoman.
Can I just respond to this? The state put in a sidewalk that went from Lantana Square to Evanston, and from Evanston Road, you can cross over and you then hit the walkway that goes through Swift Park, which takes you all the way over to Old Lancaster Pike. And from there, you can walk probably a mile or so. And so from Lancaster Pike, there will be another connection that if you cross over Lancaster Pike, that it will take you all the way down into York Lynn. And from there, you can cut through the new park and end up on I think it's the White Clay, Pennsylvania Trail, and you can walk all the way to Kennett Square.
Okay, thank you. It's just so hard to see on.
Yeah, it is,
This
but
size
it's
plan.
there. It's the state put this in probably 8 years ago or so, and it is
Okay.
one of the most well-used walkways around. There's never a time you go down Valley Road that you don't see somebody using it.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Durham, as soon as perhaps maybe you're able to check your email, I believe somebody in Mr. Tucker's office, Mr. Smith, emailed us the PowerPoint presentation. So at a later time, you probably can review that and maybe you'll be able to see it better.
Okay, thank you.
So I have Councilman Hollins and then I have Councilman. Oh, you have
Can I
another
ask
one?
another question?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, Mr. Tucker, as we talked about this morning, so I'm sure you won't be surprised. You didn't, in your presentation, talk really about the barn. So I guess my first question about the barn, which is associated with the spigot, which is associated with the significant history of this house and property, and tied into the school, even though it's quite a ways away, it's still on the path that was taken. I know the HRB approved the demolition permit. Has it been actually granted? Is it in hand for the barn, not the house, obviously?
It is not, and I went back, Councilwoman, after our call, and I reread that report, and just to be crystal clear, the board did like the idea of preserving it, but recognized why it would or could be demolished. So there's no permit that's been issued yet, but they recognized why it may be demolished, and one of the things, or may want to be demolished, and one of the things I believe they probably relied upon because it was submitted to them, and as I mentioned, I was not at the final hearing because I was out of town, and somebody in my office handled that, but there was a very comprehensive, I think a fairly comprehensive report prepared by Bernardin, a core states group company. They do a lot of work for SHPO, and that's one of the reasons we hired them. And in a May 22 report that was provided to the county, they quoted, and I think this is helpful to everybody to give some context as to why this was not a structure folks were strongly advocating for saving in addition to the house. But I'm going to quote from this report, and I'm happy to provide this to council. Given the extensive deterioration structurally and aesthetically, the level of repair and or preservation would impact, the preservation of the barn would impact every facet of the existing structure internally and externally. The scope of this level of work will result in most of the internal fabric being replaced and the exterior appearance being very different than its current appearance. And that was information the HRB and the department had at the time, and that is not currently proposed to be saved by my client for those reasons, and my client will seek a demolition permit. However, I want to assure you the house will be preserved.
Well, I think if I heard you correctly in your presentation, you said the house was being preserved voluntarily. Did I hear that?
Mr. Sinetcha, after he read the report and I read the report, voluntarily agreed to preserve the house. We did not seek a demolition permit for that house.
Doesn't the county for major plans require that resource to be preserved?
At that point, they had not. We were still in the process. So until the HRB rules on that, you have the option to seek a demolition permit. We chose not to, ultimately. We chose to preserve it.
Okay, well, regardless, I think, with all due respect to Bernardin, I know you can go out and basically hire an engineering firm to basically tell you what you want to hear. And I'm sure I could hire an engineering firm to go out and tell you that the barn is worth preserving. There are tax credits that Sinetcha can take advantage of for both the house and the barn if he plans to restore one or both of them. So I hope he will take advantage of those, which will offset any of the costs involved in that. But there are state and federal credits he can access, as well as some grants that I could let him know about that would encourage him to preserve both structures. Thing about that spigot, which you described, and which is what really makes the house, the property significant. Significant in African American history of the area. The spigot just standing there by itself with the barn gone is kind of lost its context. And so I would encourage Mr. Sinetcha to rethink saving the barn. Yes, it's a barn. It doesn't have HVAC. It doesn't need special windows or anything like that. So it's not going to be an expensive project. And I think it would, by preserving it, it would keep the character and the context of the spigot, which is what is, important here. And you and I talked about, I think you didn't mention it, the signage and possibility of getting a state marker for the site. They're talking about the folks walking to school along for a drink of water, and the spigot is just standing out there in the middle of the field. It won't be long till that spigot is probably gone, because who wants to mow around a little spigot just standing there in the middle of the lawn? But anyway, I just would give as examples that, before council, there have been other development projects of a similar nature such as the Forward School, the Wilmew property on Concord Pike that preserved an old barn that was in similar condition. I know of a Doosan project that is in my district that has a barn in similar condition that might actually end up getting preserved. So I just would encourage the property owner to rethink this, and I'm hoping that he will do the right thing and not only restore the house, but keep the context of the whole property together by restoring the house, which I don't think would be that expensive in the overall scheme of things. And again, tax credits are available. I'm happy to provide more information to you about credits and grants that could help offset any additional costs that would go along with doing so.
Thank you, Councilwoman. We would certainly, I'd certainly be interested in looking at some of the tax relief that may be available. I would just simply like to add again, Bernardin is a group that is used by SHPO. And I want to assure everybody on my council that my client does not shop, in this case, or any other I'm aware of, shop for the right answer. We went to a reputable, state-relied upon organization, and they prepared this report based on their findings, not ours, and I'm happy to share it with you, and we'll do so certainly if you'd like after the meeting via text or PDF. But I just want to assure everybody, we did not search for an answer we wanted. We did seek an independent evaluation by a reputable organization that relies on. Regarding
I'm sure my only point is that I could also find an opinion that gives the alternate opinion, a professional opinion. So
understood. Also, I would like to add and I went back and looked at this a little bit more closely after we spoke, because you asked me a couple of questions that had me sort of trying to remember, because it's been a few months since this application was in front of the Historic Review Board, and I had reviewed it before leaving town. But the spigot, we believe, has the original plumbing. It does appear to be older material and plumbing, but it is off the road. You'd have to, and it's off the walking path, and you would have to come on to this property and travel some distance. It's just not easily to see from the road. So we're going to move it up closer to the road, as at least that's what we're contemplating doing. And the signage that you and I had talked about, that is also included in the HRB's report. I know you had inquired about reaching out to some state representatives about getting a more traditional sign, and that's certainly something that the state uses to mark historic areas. We're certainly going to pursue that. I thought that was certainly a good idea, and we will do that as well.
May I just respond that typically moving resources is frowned upon. So, they lose their context, they lose their setting. So I would just encourage you maybe to reconsider that, even though it's maybe not visible from the road. That isn't necessarily the most important aspect of it. So just a thought, and happy to continue discussing it with you, or even coming out to the site and visiting it with you, maybe consulting with Chad about it. But in general, it's much better if historic resources can be left in their original setting.
I'm certainly open, and my client is, to discussing that topic further. I'm certainly not an expert. It is invisible, and we would reference it in the plaque, and some might think it would be good to see it as well, but I am not the expert, and we're certainly happy to continue that conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So right now, I just want to remind everybody, prior to speaking, you do need to state your name each and every time, unfortunately, because the meetings are recorded, and my aide is taking notes, so we need to make sure that she does recognize the voices that are speaking. Right now, I have Councilman Hollins and then Councilman Cartier. Councilman Cartier, I do see you. Councilman Hollins?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just really want to shout back to the applicant's representative here. He did shout out to me with regard to affordable housing. As most council members know, affordable housing has been foundational to my political career. I just want to applaud this applicant for being a pioneer for inclusionary zoning. We do have inclusionary zoning in Newcastle County, but we also have the contribution to the Housing Trust Fund based upon AMI of the population. So I think these are two programs that HUD has suggested to Newcastle County that we should try to encourage other jurisdictions to adopt. Inclusionary zoning is pretty much a generic term. Here in Newcastle County, we call it MPDUs, moderate price dwelling units. But to see that this particular application is taking advantage, which they have to do by county code. So I also want to thank all of the council members who actually supported the legislation. Of course, I couldn't do it by myself, but it's something I think that we can all be proud of. There's very few jurisdictions in the entire United States of America that has both inclusionary zoning as well as housing trust fund. That's why I've been very sensitive toward the use of the Housing Trust Fund because those funds are tied directly to rezonings in unincorporated Newcastle County. So there's a reason why I'm pleased that county council members supported the idea of putting more protections around the Housing Trust Fund. But in this case, I know that there's one council person that's still here today that remember when we had what was called workforce housing. That was very, very controversial. I remember being on Vance Neck Road with Councilman Bell when workforce housing was first introduced, pretty much as a preamble to the now what we call moderate price dwelling units. It was very tough. So I hope we don't get too comfortable and just assume this just happens by happenstance. Right now, as I mentioned, to have inclusionary zoning in our code, along with Housing Trust Fund, it's not a small order. I really think that we're setting an example here in Newcastle County for all of those developers who are willingly, not so willingly, but agreeable to these conditions within our code. I have to applaud them because there's a lot of pushback in a lot of other jurisdictions that I'm aware of. I know even in Wilmington, they don't even have down payment settlement help. And I found that out just by being on some of the national boards that I've been invited to serve on. So what we have here in Newcastle County is by no way a small order. It's very progressive to have these types of developments in what HUD would call opportunity zones, meaning simply that Valley Road would be considered an area of Newcastle County that where anyone who lives there has access to good schools, have access to high-paying jobs. So all of these things are part of HUD's designation to what we call high opportunity zones. So there's a lot going on with this development beyond just the fact that we designate it as from one suburban to suburban ST or transition and so forth. There's just a lot more going on for populations throughout Newcastle County that otherwise maybe wouldn't be living on Valley Road. So I'm very grateful to the progress that we have made. I'm grateful to the developers who are agreeable to continue to support the legislation, to abide by the legislation, and to go even further, as Jason Netcher has done here, who has a history of providing for inclusionary zoning long before it became popular. Some of the more desirable residential areas in Newcastle County are the result of Jason Netcher going back to developments along 896 before we even had workforce housing, let alone moderate price dwelling units. So I'm very grateful to see where we are with this. It's very meaningful to me personally. I know it's very meaningful to a lot of deserving families throughout Newcastle County who want to live in all areas of Newcastle County. So to me, this represents progress. I hear clearly what Councilwoman Durham is saying about the spigot. I think that has some relevance, but I think there, for me, to have a resident, and we do have the color school in that area as well, that goes a part of all of this history that we're talking about. And at a time like this, in this country, where people my color are still fighting for the right to vote, I just have to be very grateful to be a part of something like this in this county, that we're making certain that we're building opportunities for housing for all of our people.
Thank you, Mr. Hollins. Let's move on to Councilman Cartier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to extend my sincere appreciation to the applicant and his work with the community over all these years to develop this plan with the ST zoning and, you know, work through all the changing conditions and economic conditions that caused the plan to go in this direction. And I think the fact that the working group process with the district council person, it produces, you know, a good result and buy-in from the community. Appreciate the historical zoning aspect of this also. So in every way, I think this is a really great plan. My only question is, when you were looking at the McGrellis auction house, I know that it's been demolished. Was there any environmental cleanup needed on that site?
My client is indicating there was, and maybe I'll call up if it's
Mr.
okay.
Tucker, just
Shane
again,
Minner,
we
who
need
can
to
respond
remind you
more
just-
comprehensively.
Mr. Tucker, just need to remind you, state your name prior to speaking, just again for the record in the minutes that my aide will be taking.
Hello, Councilpersons. Shane Minner with Blenheim Homes. Yes, the McGrellis auction site is an state-approved brownfield site. So we have a state-approved contamination management plan with that. We have 10 Bears Environmental that will oversee the cleanup that is on that site. The building itself did not have any environmental issues. It was some backfill and stuff because of filling the previous clay pits on the site. But yes, it is a brownfield site that will be getting cleaned up.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions from members of council? All right, seeing none, let's turn to the public. Ms. Tucker, or Councilwoman Kilpatrick, if you have that many people in the chamber, maybe if you could get them maybe kind of lined up and maybe started to sign in.
Yeah, I think we only have one that's actually going to speak.
Okay, all right, that'll be
Okay.
perfect. Thank you. All right, let's turn to the public.
He's gone his way to the microphone.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Blake. I'm the president of GATA, Greater Hockessin Area Development Association. As many council members probably remember, I know Mr. Hollins does and others, but Hockessin actually has all of the various forms of workforce housing that have been proposed over the many years have actually been built in Hockessin. And it is the only place, to my knowledge, in all of Newcastle County where that has occurred. So there may be some down now where Councilman Carter has down in Middletown going with more growth, but we were the first and we still continue to get every plan and support them. I do want to thank Mr. Shinetcha because this is a longest focus group we've ever had in our history. Since 1967, we usually have focus groups rise and fall within a year, maybe 18 months. This one went well over 3 thanks to COVID. And Mr. Shinetcha did not give up and continued to hold meetings where we could, when we could. Zoom meetings and live meetings, and we had 27 representatives from the community sections which surround the entire area, and they were taking the message back to their communities to get input. And as of today, we have no communities that have opposed as a community entity any objections to this, and nobody has any issues because the process, as was noted by I think Mr. Cartier, the focus group and the working group process does do the job it's supposed to. It vets all of the issues that sometimes developers and attorneys and land use people forget because those people live in the community and they know how things are going to act. I want to address a couple of things. This zoning is something that I used to carry around in my notebook for probably 18 years, all the parcels on Valley Road, with the comment that one day somebody's going to come along and figure out how to take all of these miszoned parcels and put them into something where it actually would be a benefit to the community. And we're actually glad it was Mr. Shinetcha. We've worked with him in the past. He has a history of working with the community. Heck, he lives in Hockessin. So he's not going to be someone that's out of state and will never see this again. He's going to drive by this many times during the day when he's out and around. And he has done a lot of historic preservation. I referenced West Hampton. They actually lifted a house and turned it, put a new foundation on it, and restored that house. And to, I think it was Councilman Durham that made the comment about the barn. Councilwoman, I would actually ask you to go look at that barn. I grew up in a house that was built in the late 1700s, and we had a shed similar to this one, not much bigger than this one at all. And this shed is not really a barn. It's a shed and is in very poor condition. It has been altered and adulterated over the years, and there's very little original material there, and most of the original material is termite ridden and water rotted to where it is not salvageable. It's actually not even safe to go in anymore. So if you would like to look at, I think you'll see that it's really more of a shed. And it was something that when the Historic Society from Hockessin, and I don't know if Pete's on, but Pete may want to read it, but they did send in an email. In summary, he thinks that Blenheim Homes wants to thank them for reaching out to the Hockessin Historical Society to support protecting our local historical structures, and also to take time they spent to allow him to go through and research the structure and see everything. And on behalf of the Historic Society, they appreciate and respect everyone that supports protecting and preserving our local history. And with structures like this, once they're gone, you cannot replace them. So with that, Councilwoman Durham, we absolutely agree the house is worth saving and will be saved, and we appreciate that. And Mr. Shinetcha has a long history of doing that, not only here, but elsewhere in Newcastle County. Beyond that, this development really does take a lot of issues out of play for the future that have upset people in Hockessin for years. That industrial zoning is one of the highest, most pervasive types of zoning. And I always wonder how many folks actually know what you can do under industrial zoning. Rock crushing plants, asphalt mills, chemical plants, you name it. And anytime these legacy zonings and surrounded by residential, it becomes problematic in the city of Wilmington. And we also have that out in Hockessin and Yorkland, where there are a lot of these little orphan parcels that have been left over the decades. So we are actually applauding the fact that we are getting rid of the commercial neighborhood, the industrial, and some of the other higher zonings, and putting in this new plan that will work. And one of the other benefits with the gated group is we always ask for code plus plus. The county code is good. Won't say it's great, but it's good. But we want better, and we want better for everyone in Newcastle County. We want the code to be exceeded whenever and wherever possible, and we have asked that of every developer that brings something into the area. And in this case, there's more open space than the code requires, there's more buffering than the code requires, and the density is lower than the code allows. Those are all positive things. And the walkability, Mr. Shinetcha met with a lot of interested individuals that did not get involved early on to ask about connectivity to the walking paths. And he said, yes, we will do that. And wherever possible, we will connect even more connections to other walking paths. But the path that was spoken about goes all the way, as Councilwoman Kilpatrick said, from Lantana to Old Lancaster Pike. It is the most traveled path in all of Hockessin. I don't think the hack track gets as much traffic as the Valley Road path does. But we are very, very happy to see this project come to fruition after so many years of working on it. And we hope that we will be able to get your support on this, as this has been a long, arduous process where the original plan was mixed use with some commercial and business uses in there. And that was also supported, but unfortunately, we don't control the economy, and we certainly don't control what happened with COVID. So like every good business person, you roll with the punches, you come up with options, and you try to work them through. And in this case, instead of just throwing up their hands and saying, we're walking away, they worked through this at great expense and time to work with the community and to meet all of the requirements. So we would ask for your support of this project and give your favorable votes for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else in the chamber, Councilwoman Kilpatrick, that wants to speak?
No, I don't see anybody else from the general public.
Turning to the public, or turning to the chat room here, do we have anybody with their hand up looking to speak, Ms. Finnegan?
Councilman, there's no public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, Councilwoman Kilpatrick? Yes.
Can I just say one thing here? I just want it known that out of all of the press that we've received on this, and there was an article in the News Journal, following that article, I received 2 emails that were negative. One was not negative towards the community itself, but was negative in environmental issues. They just didn't want the land developed, period, for all of the environmental reasons that you could possibly think of. And the other person that wrote to me was worried about increased crime and another development bringing down the home values in Hockessin. So I just want to make sure that I do mention that those two people did have comments. I also heard via the grapevine that somebody had called the president and said that someone was they were turned away from the working group. And I want to tell you that this working group over all of these years took on new people continually and brought them up to speed, including very much into the last working group meeting that was held. There were several new people there and they were all brought up to speed, all their questions answered. So if anybody was turned away from a working group, that I think would surprise all of us.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Hollins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if the person that said that about calling the president, did they realize the president is no longer on county council?
Wrong president.
Okay.
We have Council President Karen Hartley-Nagel.
Yes, I just wanted to say, yes, two people did contact me, and one had concerns that she was turned away or thought she had, and I was surprised that she felt that way. And then the other one was not happy with the development. And I want to thank Sean for taking the time this weekend, over the holiday weekend, to address those concerns. So my concerns were addressed in depth, and he answered all the questions I could possibly ask this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Stuckey, I'm sure that Co-Chair Kirkpatrick will keep you updated, but if everything goes as planned, we'll look forward to seeing you back, or at least the application back next Tuesday night.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you all, Council, for your time and patience.
Have a good day. All right, turning to the last item on the agenda is a presentation from Mapco. We have Dave Gula with us today that will speak a little bit about his presentation, and he will have a PowerPoint that he will share from his desk.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I'm searching out my PowerPoint.
Now, Dave, you had plenty of time.
I had it. It was there. Hold on.
It's always that. That's how it goes.
Well, my co-workers would say, imagine if you will, someone who should not be in charge of technology. That's usually me. So I think I got it now.
There you go. We can see it.
Okay. So I want to thank you for having us today, having me. I'm sure that you're seeing the full presentation. You're not seeing the notes page, are you?
No, we're seeing your 2050 Regional Transportation Plan update.
I will get started. I know there's a time pressing. I will keep this as short as I can. Here today to give you an update on our Regional Transportation Plan. We are in the update process, and we are making our way through as many of our partners as we can to get this information out there and get some review. So for those of you who don't work with us all the time, WMAPCO is your regional planning council. We do transportation planning. We work closely with DelDOT in Delaware. We also work with MDOT because we have both Cecil County, Maryland, and Newcastle County, Delaware within our region. We are, as I said, a regional agency with following federal policy guidelines. And really our job, if you want to boil it down, is we work with the DOTs as projects are being planned. Anything that has federal funding is something that we are concerned with, and make sure that that basically we look at all the modes whenever a project is coming forward. But we also work closely with communities. Sometimes we do small planning projects, the goal of which is to going from the community, taking solutions to them and trying to solve problems that exist out there. We are not an implementation agency, so our dedicated funding is not for the implementation of projects. It is, we are really mandated as a coordinating agency with the within the federal structure and with the state DOTs. So today we're going to talk about the Regional Transportation Plan. It is our principal plan. We have 4 major documents. This is one of the 4. This basically sets our policy goals, the objectives to get to those goals, and the actions needed to be successful, plus the performance measures that we have to have as part of the federal process to make sure that we are actually making progress. There are also within this plan our major transportation projects. We consider the ones that are funded on the constrained list, and we have an aspirational list that has not yet been funded. We do update this document every 4 years, going back to 1996. So our next update is due March 2023. As far as progress on the plan, our schedule started back in June to work through putting the body of the text together, preparing presentations, and really reviewing the goals and objectives and actions. We have been on a agency outreach schedule since late August. Met with many of not just Newcastle County, but also in Cecil County, met with municipalities and civic groups. The goal, again, being to get out to as many people as possible. The project lists have been developed. The air quality conformity has been run, modeled, and we did meet our air quality conformity targets. So we continue our public outreach with the document hopefully being released tomorrow. We're working on that now, but today the WMAPCO Council approved the document for public outreach, so our public release. So what it means is it's a draft document, and it goes out on our website, so everyone in the public can look at it. Generally, a 30-day outreach period is required, but really we're going to have this open until March 6th. We will collect comments from anyone who sends them, refine the document, and actually by March 20th, by our March council meeting, which is probably that first week of March, is when we hope to see it adopted. So one of the things we use to track
is your screen supposed to be moving forward? Because I'm still seeing the cover page.
Okay.
I thought you were just on a long speech, Dave. I was thinking the same thing.
Sorry about that. Screen should be moving forward.
It's also not on slideshow mode, but
Right.
I think you're just on the wrong screen in your computer.
Yeah, get your PowerPoint and open it up again. It's locked.
Yep. We'll restart.
So all we saw was the cover page.
And you haven't really missed much exciting yet, so I'll reopen it. We'll see if we can move this forward.
I've seen it a few times, so I'm good, Dave.
Yeah, I know. I think there's probably others who have also seen it. All right, come on. Let's do the share. Come on. I am not the biggest fan of technology that there is.
Can you just click on each slide on the left side, Dave? Maybe it'll bring it up instead of...
I can try that and see if that helps. Right now, it does.
There it goes.
Maybe you just have to click them.
All right, you won't see them as big, but I don't think there's any small details that you'll miss. Let me reposition if I can.
It'll be fine.
Okay, so as I mentioned, that's who we are. We had that conversation. This is our plan, and this is what we're trying to do with these in terms of the policy document. This is the schedule that I just talked about, and so what you see here are pieces of our progress report. The progress report is a document that we do in the interim where the plan is during the 4 years of the plan, and it does track where we're going and how are things getting done. So 17% of the actions in the plan are still considered challenges. You'll be all familiar with some of these: growth outside the centers and the core areas. When we look at the maps, you'll see that a rise in single occupancy vehicle trips, a rise in vehicle miles traveled, and ongoing road safety issues. There's been a lot of more intensive crashes post-pandemic. So also then you look at 23% of our actions, we are in the yellow, meaning we're meeting them. We wouldn't call them a success yet, but then we're seeing progress. 60% of the actions in the plan from the last update, we consider successes. We do meet our air quality targets. We see improving air quality. We're seeing local plan implementation. As I mentioned, working with small community groups or even larger communities, we put together a plan, our council approves it, and then those plans go into the project list for implementation. And so we're seeing some of those projects implemented. They don't always go as fast as we'd like, but the fact that we're seeing them implemented shows that the process does work, even if it's a little slow. We are seeing more and more biking and walking efforts and in implementation of projects. A lot of that based on Newcastle County in particular taking, great interest in walking and biking in Newcastle County. We also see some congestion mitigation, and so that's always a good thing. Nobody wants to see congestion. Most people think it's the worst thing ever, but we do think that we're making some progress. So one of the other things that happens during these, the plan restructuring is a public opinion survey. It's done by phone. We need to reach out and get basically 600 full surveys given, and those surveys have to meet the demographics of our region. So in terms of the ratio of different employment or different income levels, the racial demographics that make up this region, and even the two counties, there's a certain quotient needed to make it statistically valid, which it is. It takes many more than 600 calls to get there. Folks do not like to answer their phone, and they certainly don't always like to answer questions. But some of the questions we do ask, here's one that pops up. The transportation system meets my needs or doesn't. We were seeing a lot of growth in 2006 to get up to that 88% in 2018, the last time we took this survey. However, in the interim period, we had a pandemic. We actually had people changing the way they work, working from home, the difference in commuting patterns. So that number's back, it's down to 75%. We don't love it, but it does show us that there are some things that are going to need to be addressed. And it also shows that that pandemic has had an impact on how people have their business. And that's good across the know. Other things that come up are questions about, this isn't going to want to fire, I'm still going with the technology here. Some questions that are also asked about preserving open space and farmland. It's somewhat important to 95% of the people. That's good news for us. Revitalizing existing communities and downtowns is at least somewhat important to 88% of the people that were polled. Sometimes they're always appropriate to mix residential, office, and retail. That comes up with 85% of the people who were polled. So these are all ways for us that we and make sure that they still are valid. I'm not going to go in depth on the actual policies. There is a lot there. As much as we try to keep the document short, there are a lot of details. Again, the document will be available starting tomorrow, so you'll be able to take a look at it yourself. But the way that it is structured is we start with goals. We have 3 main goals. Then we work down to the objectives to meet those goals, and then the actions we take to get the objectives. Then we look at the performance measures. The performance measures, again, are federally mandated, and it basically is a way to track progress. And that's how we go back to that that previous slide I showed you, the red, yellow, and green lights, to show how we're meeting those performance measures. Now we're moving to the next section of the report, where we deal with mapping of transportation investment areas. And so the way that it's set up is centers are the most intensive areas for transportation investment, and the cores are just outside of that. The difference, really the main difference between these, and when you see the map you'll understand, is that centers generally have, if not a rail station, they have access to rail. So there could be a rail station in those places. The core is generally the areas you think about with the most population, the most transportation improvements, and high quality transit. Community are areas that are a little more suburban. Developing are areas that are still in the process of changing over, and rural are the areas that we really don't want to see touched at all. So the way these maps come together, we look back at our 2018 update map. Then we consider the state strategies map and how it's changed. And then we looked, in this particular case, since the comp plan is just completed and approved, we looked at how that map has changed and what potentially could impact changes to our area. I think one of the main changes to point out are, when you look at this map of the comp plan, you see these areas, and hopefully you can see my cursor, they're deemed corridors, and they're an important part of the comp plan. We've kept those, and you'll see they all end up in the core areas. The reason they don't become more intensive use is because they do not have access to rail in most cases. So they kind of border areas, or they already are, as in we do see correspondence at Churchman's Crossing area and North Claymont area. Now, I don't expect you to read this, but I just wanted you to understand the difference between those center core developing community and rural designations. It shows you what type of transportation investments are appropriate for those areas. We have met with Newcastle County's land use. We are looking at these. We think that maybe the center investment areas could see a little more investment in bus service, more frequent service, more intensive span of service, things like that. But we're working on comments that we've gotten from them to see if we're going to make changes in that case. But I just think it's important for you to know what the areas that we show, how they relate back to the funding. Now we get to the fun part, the funding itself. So, because our plan is has to be federally constrained, that means we have to look ahead. What funding will be available as we move out to 2050? It's a very complicated formula. I don't pretend to understand all of what we do because I am not the finance guy or the tech guy. So what I will tell you is that when you look at the funding that Delaware projects for transportation, you can see where it goes: state of good repair, debt service, operations. And then what you see is that capital projects have a big chunk of that pot, and of the capital project pot, 16% is what goes forward. The good news is that about 48% of that funding for capital projects goes to Newcastle County instead of Kent or Essex County. And so looking further at this, what we're showing is how available funds have changed since what was forecasted in 2019 to 2020. And it does show you the short-term, how the short-term, mid-term, and long-term breaks out when you start talking about those projects and when they will actually be funded for implementation. So there's the amount of money that's available. Looking at it a little different way, what you see is a different breakdown showing how some grants are repaid in Cecil County and Newcastle County, comparable, and the funding amounts are not really comparable between Cecil and Newcastle County. Cecil County being much more rural and gets significantly less funding for transportation improvements than Newcastle County gets from DelDOT. But it does give you some totals that are going to be available. And the other thing to think about, generally we use a 3% inflation. So when we're building our budget, we look at when the project is going to be implemented, and that is the year that we have to plan the funding for. So we have to use that 3% inflation to carry it out to whatever year of implementation is shown. The other thing that's changed a little bit is right now inflation is a little higher than that. So for the short-term projects, most of the time we're going to be carrying forward a 5% inflation note, simply because not only are costs up for all of the building materials as they have been, but we have, with interest rates, we have an even higher level of inflation. So in the short term, we expect maybe a 5% inflation rate. So working from that, we would normally have a full list, which we have, which is way too much to try to show you today. We're currently working with DelDOT to update the list as we are in the draft period of outreach. We still have project changes that can be made. But just to give you an idea of how these things are listed, we have the constrained project list, which uses the available funding to fit as many projects as possible in the short term, medium term, and long term periods. All of those have to correspond to the funding that's available for those periods. The grants project list, we are going to show some of the projects that we think could be submitted for grants funding from the federal government as part of the recent transportation bill. And so that's another piece of funding that we haven't shown it as specifically in years past, but there's a lot of, when people heard there was a lot of additional funding in the transportation bill, they didn't realize that that a lot of the allot is really grant funding. It's not necessarily more money to every state. It's more opportunity to apply for grants. Then when we talk about the aspirations projects, we are talking about projects that are not yet funded, where the funding hasn't been identified. And then, as I said, year of expenditure assumes a 5% inflation rate in short term and 3% medium long term. And new projects are identified through WMAPCO, our plans, but also DelDOT and MDOT in Cecil County will supply projects that they believe should get consideration. So again, there's so many projects, it would be very difficult to show you everything. There are various pages in the document itself that you'll be able to look at, and I will explain how those projects are broken down. We'll show one page with a map and numbered projects for proposed projects above $15 million, and it gives you the service year or when we expect those would be implemented. Following pages are those little more detail on those lists, giving some more estimates for cost and estimated dates in service. Then you move to proposed projects that are below $15 million, again shown by the expected year of service, and they're all, again, shown on the map and numbered so you can follow them. And then there's a following that, there's a list, a couple of page list that again gives you a little more details of the type of projects, what it's going to accomplish, how much we think it's going to cost, and when it might be in service. Then, those are the constrained, those first two pages are the constrained map list. Now we move to unfunded aspiration projects. That next map shows you projects that are bike ped or multimodal with a color coding between them. And then the project lists, again, not as much, they're not an estimated cost here, but it does give a good project description of what is attempted to be done. And then the final category that's mapped are just unfunded aspirations that are roadway or transit, following the list as well of those. As it's a big chunk of the report. And again, I give you a flavor. There are 350 projects total. The funding that we have available is just a small portion of those projects can be funded right now. But what we have out there are things like transit expansion and enhancements. Gives you an idea, again, of what the cost would look like and when we could expect to see those things implemented. Looking at new technologies with electronic vehicles and autonomous vehicles and support that's needed for that as part of good projects. That shows you, again, a cost and a rough idea of when those would be implemented. There are some more specifics with the I-95 and SR 896 interchange, showing an estimated cost and when it is expected to be completed and in service. Similarly with Tybout's Corner, Child McConnell Bridge, as you can see, is pushed out quite a bit. Claymont Train Station, which is nearly finished, and the Newport Train Station, which has not yet been given a date, although there has been somebody, as we'll say, kind of guaranteed to see it more. So while it isn't as many more concrete details about that at this time. Wrap up. We're going to have events on February 8th. It'll be Emily Olympic Figures. It's called our Power Town event. At this particular out-of-town event, we are going to focus on the RTP, give some information about that. We're also going to have the big folks starting to look at environmental justice and how it applies to these projects.
additional members from members of council? Councilwoman Durham?
Thank you. Hey, Dave. How are you? I'll try not to ask too many questions, but I'll come to the thing on February 8th. Just a couple things, I guess. One is, I'm sure you're well aware that 2022 saw, really high fatality rate on our roads and with pedestrians as well, pedestrians, bicyclists, and on the roadways. So I didn't really hear you talk about how all of this is geared towards increasing safety in all of our transportation modes. And, I guess my question is, how is Wilmaco trying to shift our spending to address the issue of safety?
I'll upload it to our...
Policies of the bill, you will see that most of the goals are related to not necessarily just vehicle travel, but really looking more at how people get around. And so, again, advocating for more funding for bike, ped, and transit is part of the way. The other way is our goals basically look to lower crashes and certainly make it safer for other modes to get around where there aren't opportunity for some to go somewhere by bike or on foot. We look to put in pathways and things like that. So it is part of our overarching policy and action goals is to make it safer and more comfortable for people to do just that, to be out on bikes and on foot.
So yeah, if I may, I've been working in this realm for a couple decades now, and I know it's not just Wilmapco, it's all of the agencies involved. But it's my frustration is that in my little lifetime or half my lifetime, I'm still seeing us repeat the same old things over and over again every year. I have not seen, you talked about, basically the issue of trying to address sprawl, trying to get development in more appropriate locations near transit or whatever. But we had this same exact conversation 20 years ago. I don't think anything's changed. And I'm not blaming that on Wilmapco at all, but maybe there is a role that Wilmapco could play along with other agencies, including the county and our land use process. But, I think we all need to work together to try to really, I just really think we need a paradigm shift, and I don't see it happening. And I think all of us need to somehow put our heads together to bring that paradigm shift around. As one small example, just this morning, I had a conversation about two different projects involving roundabouts, and, hearing that, roundabouts just, for one reason or another, just can't work. Like it's still a battle trying to get roundabouts approved through the process. And that's just really sad to me, because they have such huge benefits for bikes and peds and vehicular traffic, reducing fatalities, reducing accident crashes, making it better for bikes and peds, and eliminating the use of signalization often, eliminating the need to expand the entire roadway by just improving the intersection with a roundabout. So in 10, 15 years, I have not seen Delaware's roundabout policy advance really at all. There, we have a few roundabouts here and there, and I hear that DelDOT is supportive of putting more in, but I heard about 2 projects this morning where they've tried as hard as they can to reject roundabouts where they make sense. Another project in my district is DuPont Road. It's between my district and Councilman Streets, and it's a pedestrian project by the charter school up to Porky Oliver's, and it's kind of hitting roadblocks because it's not on the map, some predetermined map. And I just think we need a system that can somehow, when projects like that crop up, we need to be able to recognize them and move forward with them more quickly, and not throw these, no pun intended, roadblocks up against these projects that, this is literally a pedestrian project at a school with kids walking on the roadway because they're driving to school and parking farther and farther away from school along DuPont Road, and it's a real safety issue. But we can't, it's probably years away from getting on anybody's list, and that's just frustrating to me. So I just wish we could do more to really shift things. I'm on another committee because of Cooch's Bridge regarding the I-95 and 896 flyover, and it seems to me like we redo that intersection every 10 years. It's are we ever going to get it right? How often do we have to redo it? This current one is a $380 million project. I wish I could have a piece of that money to use for all the bike ped projects in my district, and for some roundabouts and safety projects to, get people out of their cars and get some pathways built. I know you talked a lot about, pathway projects, but I'm not seeing them, really be emphasized, I think, in the way they should be. So thank you for listening, and thank you for being here today. And I know our conversations will continue. But again, I just want to do all I can to help sort of bring about a paradigm shift. So look forward to partnering with you guys.
Well, Dave has the workshop coming up, and it's probably a perfect place to start that off.
Dave and I run into each other from time to time, so we have this conversation a lot.
We do. Thanks
I imagine over 2 decades.
Pretty much. Off and on.
All right. Additional questions from members of council? Rachel, do we have anybody from the public?
Mr. Chair, there is no public comment.
All right. Ms. Scola, thank you so much for joining us this still afternoon. Soon it'll be evening. And
Motion to adjourn.
we just make sure we don't have anybody from the public that wants to speak under other. Thank you, Dave, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Rachel, anybody have their hands up?
I do. I actually have Pete Seeley from I think it's Hockessin Historical District. Pete, I have given you permission to speak. If you can unmute your mic and make your comment.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Pete.
Okay, my name is Pete Seeley with the Hockessin Historical Society, and I just wanted to add my thoughts on the Burt Robinson house and the spigot and the barn. There's talk recently about trying to get a historic marker installed there at the site, and I thought in the past the Historic Review Board wanted to have an informational sign. They're being very limited right now on the amount of sentences that you can put on those historic markers. They're limiting them to about 6 to 8 sentences total. So it's not a whole lot of room for wording. And they're trying to also limit them to not being installed on residential properties that are smaller, because sometimes the new homeowners don't want a big blue and yellow sign in front of their house. So those are issues that I think need to be thought about. And Dee was exactly right, where if you move that spigot, it kind of loses its historical significance. I think there is an option now where the School 107C has a museum where maybe that could be placed, and then information could be posted about that spigot. But also, if you leave the spigot where it is, the public doesn't have access to it because it's on private property. So I think that becomes an issue also, where people can't really see the spigot, and if you put a sign up by the road, it doesn't allow the public to get to it. So with it not being a park and being a private residence, I think that brings a little bit more complexity into the issue. But I would love to work with you, and if it is possible to put a historic marker there and it's an acceptable type of building for that, that's not our decision. That's the Public Archives' decision, whether it's deemed historic enough for that. We would be willing to work with whoever on those issues. So thank you. Thanks for the time, too.
Thank you. Rachel, do we have anybody else under other public comment?
I have no further public comment.
Okay. Councilman Carter?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We'll see everybody back next Tuesday.